It was a cold Tuesday morning in Geneva when the woman walked into the conference room at the United Nations building. She wasn't there to make speeches or pose for photos. She carried a thick folder under her arm, its edges worn from being opened and closed too many times. Inside were pages of data, lab results, anonymous testimonies, and satellite images of hidden facilities tucked away in industrial zones and rural backroads across the globe. She had spent the last 3 years chasing whispers, rumors of something quietly changing what it meant to be human. The room was half full. Delegates from different countries sat with crossed arms or half glanced at their phones. Some looked tired. Others looked bored. A few were already whispering to each other, as if this meeting was just another item to check off before lunch. She took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. Her voice was calm but firm, like someone who had seen too much to sugarcoat the truth anymore. She explained how scientists, doctors, and even rogue biohackers had begun altering human DNA, not just to fix diseases, but to enhance people. To make them smarter, stronger, faster. Not in some distant future, but right now. Babies were being born with tweaks to their genes that gave them better memory, sharper focus, or even resistance to stress. These weren't science fiction fantasies. They were happening in private clinics in countries with loose regulations, sometimes even in converted garages with equipment bought online. And the most alarming part? No one was really keeping track. She showed a map on the screen behind her. Red dots blinked across continents: Europe, Asia, North and South America. Each dot represented a confirmed or suspected site where genetic enhancements were being performed. Some were run by well-funded startups, others by individuals with little more than a laptop and a dream of upgrading humanity. She told the room about a young boy in Chile who could read fluently at age 2, not because he was a prodigy, but because his parents had paid for a cognitive enhancement package before he was even born. She spoke of athletes in Eastern Europe, using gene therapies to recover faster, train harder, and push past natural limits. And she warned that these changes weren't just skin deep. They were written into the very code of life, and they could be passed down to future generations. For a moment, the room fell silent. Even the man who'd been scrolling through emails looked up. But then came the questions, not about how to stop it, but whether they even should. "Isn't this just progress?" asked one delegate from a tech-forward nation. "What if these enhancements help cure Alzheimer's or depression?" countered another. "And who are we to decide what's natural?" added a third, arms folded. She tried to explain that the issue wasn't the science itself. It was the lack of rules, the secrecy, the inequality. Only the wealthy could afford these upgrades. That meant the gap between rich and poor wouldn't just be about money anymore. It would be written into people's bodies. And once that happened, there'd be no going back. But the council wasn't ready to act. They thanked her politely. They nodded. They promised to review the findings. Then they voted narrowly to hold off on any new restrictions. Too risky, they said. Too soon. Too much economic potential at stake. One official even joked that maybe they should get enhanced themselves to keep up with the times. She left the building that afternoon with the same folder, now feeling heavier than before. Rain had started to fall, light and cold, soaking the shoulders of her coat. She didn't look back. She already knew what this delay meant. While the world's leaders debated definitions and procedures, the work hadn't stopped. In basements, in labs with no name, in countries that didn't care about UN resolutions, people were still editing the human blueprint, and every day that passed made it harder to turn back. She thought about her niece, just 5 years old, who loved drawing galaxies and asking endless questions about black holes. Would she grow up in a world where some kids were born with built-in advantages, better brains, stronger hearts, calmer nerves, just because their parents could pay for it? Would she feel like she was falling behind before she even started school? The thought made her stomach twist. Back at her small apartment near the lake, she poured a cup of tea and opened her laptop. Emails poured in, some from fellow scientists warning of new developments, others from worried parents who'd heard rumors and didn't know what to believe. One message stood out. It was from a doctor in Bangkok who claimed to have seen a patient with gene edits so advanced They shouldn't have been possible outside a top-tier research institute, yet there was no record of it, no oversight, nothing. She stared out the window. The city lights shimmered on the water. Everything looked peaceful, normal. But beneath that calm surface, something was shifting. Quietly, steadily, irreversibly. Humanity was stepping into a new chapter, not with a grand announcement or a global vote, but through back doors and whispered deals. And the people in charge? They were still arguing about whether the door should have been locked in the first place. She closed her eyes for a moment. She knew she'd keep fighting, keep sounding the alarm. But part of her also knew, deep in her bones, that the moment for prevention had already slipped away. The real question now wasn't whether this would happen, it was how the world would handle what came next. And that, she realized, was a problem no single person, no matter how smart or well-intentioned, could solve alone. The train had left the station. All anyone could do now was try to steer it before it jumped the tracks. 18 months passed and the world didn't end, but it did start to change in ways no one could ignore. At first, it was small things. A teenager in Seoul solving a math problem that had stumped professors for decades, a farmer in Kenya, growing crops that stayed green even during the worst drought in memory, a violinist in Vienna playing a concerto with such emotional depth that audiences wept, not because of the music alone, but because something in her performance felt different, sharper, deeper, more human, yet somehow beyond it. People started noticing patterns. The top students in elite universities weren't just smart. They seemed to learn faster, remember everything, and stay calm under pressure in ways that felt unnatural. Olympic hopefuls recovered from injuries in weeks instead of months. Job candidates with perfect focus and flawless emotional control began outshining everyone else in high-stakes interviews. No one said it out loud at first, but whispers grew louder. Are they enhanced? The term mod started appearing online, not as an insult, not yet, but as a quiet label. Short for modified. Some wore it like a badge of pride. Others hid it like a secret. Parents who'd spent their life savings on early gene therapies for their children now watched them thrive in school, sports, even social situations, while kids without enhancements struggled to keep up. It wasn't fair, but fairness had never been part of the deal. This was the free market, just applied to biology. At first, governments tried to pretend nothing was happening. Officially, genetic enhancement was still banned in most countries, but enforcement was patchy at best. In some places, clinics operated under the radar, calling their services preventive health optimization or cognitive wellness programs. Paperwork was faked. Regulators were paid off. And in a few bold nations, the rules were quietly rewritten. Not with fanfare. Just a line added to a health policy here, a loophole widened there. The message was clear. If you can do it safely, go ahead. We won't stop you. Tension began to simmer in everyday life. At school board meetings, parents argued over whether enhanced kids should be placed in separate classes. In workplaces, rumors spread about who got promoted because of talent and who got promoted because of tech. Religious leaders warned that humanity was playing God. Scientists countered that healing and improving were part of human nature. Meanwhile, ordinary people just felt confused, anxious, and left behind. Then came the viral video. A young person, no older than 16, appeared on a financial news channel, calmly explaining how they'd predicted a major stock crash weeks in advance, using a personal neural interface linked to real-time data streams. They spoke with the clarity of a seasoned economist, but their eyes held the stillness of someone who'd never known sleepless nights or panic. The clip spread like wildfire. Within hours, Mod Genius was trending worldwide. That was the turning point. Fear replaced curiosity. Suddenly, it wasn't just about better grades or faster healing. It was about control. About who would shape the future. Baseline humans, the unmodified majority, started feeling like second-class citizens in their own species. Protests erupted in cities across Europe and South America. Signs read, "Keep humanity human and no upgrades. Just us." But in other places, especially in tech hubs and research centers, people lined up outside private clinics, credit cards in hand, hoping to give their children a fighting chance. The Global Scientific Accord, the same group that had delayed action a year and a half earlier, called an emergency session. This time the mood was different. Delegates didn't yawn or check their phones. They leaned forward. Some looked afraid. Others looked determined. The woman from Geneva was invited back, though she hadn't asked to return. She sat quietly in the back listening as country after country reported the same thing. The genie was out. And it wasn't just peeking, it was running. One delegate from a small island nation stood up and said something no one expected. "We can't ban what's already in our blood." He explained that in his country, a local doctor had used gene editing tools to protect children from a rare but deadly virus that had plagued their community for generations. The treatment worked. No side effects. Now those kids were healthier, stronger, and yes, smarter than before. Are you telling me I should undo that? That I should let my people suffer just to follow a rule made in a room full of people who've never seen our hospitals? No one had an answer. The debate raged for days. Some pushed for a total global ban, strict, immediate, with heavy penalties. Others argued for regulation, not prohibition. Set safety standards, ensure equal access, prevent abuse. But how do you regulate something that can be done with a $200 DNA kit bought online? How do you ensure equal access when the technology costs more than most families earn in a year? In the end, the council chose the middle path again. They drafted a new proposal, a worldwide moratorium on heritable genetic modifications. That meant no more edits that could be passed down to future children. Somatic changes, those affecting only one person, would still be allowed under strict medical supervision. It sounded reasonable, balanced, responsible, but the woman from Geneva knew better. She'd seen the data. The first generation of enhanced children was already entering puberty. Some had already started relationships. Biology doesn't wait for policy. And once those edited genes entered the general population, even by accident, they'd spread. Nature doesn't care about UN resolutions. She walked out of the building that evening, not with anger, but with a quiet sadness. The world was splitting, not along borders or beliefs, but along biology. And no amount of paperwork could glue it back together. Back home, she scrolled through news feeds filled with headlines. Mod athlete breaks world record. Parents sue school for bias against enhanced students. Underground gene clinics exposed in Berlin. The conversation wasn't about if this was happening anymore. It was about how to live with it. She thought about her niece again. The girl was now 6, still drawing galaxies, still asking big questions. But lately she'd started asking, "Am I normal?" After hearing kids at school talk about upgrades, the woman didn't know what to say. There was no right answer anymore. Outside, the city hummed with life. Cars, voices, music from open windows. Everything looked the same. But beneath the surface, humanity was quietly dividing into two streams. Those who were changing and those who weren't. And the scary part wasn't the change itself. It was the silence between them, the growing gap where understanding used to be. No one knew what came next. But one thing was certain, the world wouldn't wait for permission to evolve. It never had. The video that changed everything wasn't dramatic. No explosions, no shouting, no secret labs exposed. Just a teenager sitting at a desk, speaking calmly into a webcam, explaining how they'd predicted a major financial crash weeks before it happened. Their eyes were steady, their voice smooth, their logic razor-sharp. They mentioned using a personal neural assistant, a small implant linked to global data streams, that helped them spot patterns no human could see alone. It wasn't magic. It wasn't even illegal. But it felt like a door swinging open into a future most people weren't ready for. Within hours, the clip had millions of views. Within days, it was all anyone talked about. News channels replayed it endlessly. Talk shows debated it. Social media exploded. Some called the teen a genius. Others called them a threat. The real fear wasn't just that one person could outthink the entire financial system. It was that anyone with the right upgrade could do the same. And if money, power, and influence were now tied to who had the best enhancements, what chance did ordinary people have? Panic spread faster than facts. Parents pulled their kids out of schools rumored to have mod students. Job applicants were quietly asked if they'd ever undergone cognitive optimization. In some cities, people started avoiding public transport or cafes where enhanced individuals were known to gather, not out of hatred but unease. It was like living next to a different kind of human, One that moved faster, thought clearer, felt less fear. And that difference, however small it seemed on paper, began to feel like a canyon. The United Nations Security Council called an emergency meeting. This time there was no hesitation, no polite delays. The mood in the room was tense, almost desperate. Delegates spoke in hushed tones about biological inequality and the erosion of human dignity. One ambassador compared the situation to nuclear weapons, once invented. They couldn't be uninvented, but maybe, just maybe, they could be controlled. After 3 sleepless days of debate, the Council passed Resolution 2871. It was blunt, sweeping, and absolute. All forms of human genetic and cognitive enhancement were now prohibited worldwide. No more edits to embryos. No neural implants for performance. No gene therapies for intelligence, strength, or emotional control, unless strictly for treating a diagnosed medical condition. Countries that signed the treaty had to shut down enhancement clinics, criminalize the technology, and register every known enhanced individual for monitoring and public safety. The announcement was broadcast live. Many cheered. Religious groups praised it as a victory for human nature. Labor unions called it a step toward fairness. For a brief moment, it felt like the world had hit the brakes just in time. But in the quiet corners of the globe, nothing stopped. In fact, things sped up. Within weeks, underground networks grew bolder. What had once been hidden in basements now operated on encrypted apps, with delivery drones dropping gene-editing kits to remote farms or suburban homes. Gene havens popped up, floating clinics in international waters, mobile labs in desert outposts, pop-up centers in countries that refused to sign the treaty. Some even offered enhancement tourism, where families could fly in, get the procedure done, and leave before authorities noticed. Worse, the ban created a black and white divide where none had fully existed before. Enhanced people, many of whom had never asked for their modifications, having been edited as embryos by hopeful parents, suddenly found themselves labeled as risks. Some lost jobs. Others were denied visas. In a few places, they were required to carry special ID cards. Fear turned into suspicion, and suspicion into discrimination. And when people feel cornered, they don't back down. They organize. Then came the health crisis no one saw coming. In Oslo, a group of enhanced teenagers began showing strange symptoms: joint pain, fatigue, sudden fevers. Doctors were baffled until they traced it back to an early generation cognitive enhancer. One that had seemed safe in trials but carried a hidden flaw. The modification interacted badly with a common virus, triggering a rare autoimmune reaction. Dozens fell ill. A few were hospitalized. When the affected families begged for help, they were met with silence. The UN refused to fund treatment, citing the ban. "You chose this path," one official reportedly said. "Now you live with the consequences." That was the breaking point. Instead of waiting for permission, the enhanced community built their own response. Scientists who'd once worked in secret labs came forward. Doctors who'd performed enhancements offered their skills for free. Within months, they'd created a cooperative, sharing data, testing antidotes, and developing a reversal therapy that could safely undo the faulty edit. They didn't ask governments for approval. They didn't wait for ethics boards. They just did it, and it worked. News of their success spread quietly but powerfully. People saw something new, not a threat but a community taking responsibility. Not reckless ambition but care and collaboration. For the first time, many began to wonder if the real danger wasn't the technology, but the fear that had made the world turn its back on its own people. Meanwhile, the old system started to crack. One by one, nations began stepping away from the treaty. First a small island nation, then a tech-forward European country, then a major Asian economy. Their reason was always the same: we cannot afford to fall behind. Not militarily, not economically, but biologically. If their neighbors were enhancing their citizens, how could they compete in science, medicine, even everyday innovation? The Council watched in dismay as its authority crumbled. Sanctions were threatened, but who would enforce them? Police couldn't arrest an idea. Borders couldn't stop a virus or a gene. And the more the Council pushed, the more people resisted. Even among baseline humans, support for the ban began to fade. Why punish people for being sick? They asked. Why treat healing like a crime? Back in Geneva, the woman who'd first raised the alarm watched it all unfold from a distance. She wasn't invited to the meetings anymore, but she didn't need to be. She saw the truth in the faces of strangers on the street, the confusion, the fear, but also the dawning realization that humanity had already crossed a line. There was no going back to the way things were. The only question left was, what kind of future would they build from here? She thought about her niece again. The girl had started asking harder questions now. If someone's smarter because of a chip, are they still human? If I can't run as fast as a mod kid, does that mean I'm less? There were no easy answers. But maybe, the woman thought, the goal wasn't to go back, but to move forward together with honesty, care, and a little more humility, because the council had tried to draw a line in the sand. But the tide had already come in, and it wasn't stopping for anyone. The ban didn't stop anything, it just pushed everything underground. What had once been whispered about in labs and clinics now happened in shipping containers, on private yachts, in hidden rooms behind laundromats and bakeries. The technology didn't disappear. It just got quieter, smarter, and harder to track. And the more the authorities cracked down, the more people resisted, not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. In cities across the world, gene runners became a new kind of underground courier. They didn't carry drugs or weapons. They carried vials of edited DNA, neural firmware updates, and tiny implant kits wrapped in foil and tucked into false-bottomed bags. Some were former medics. Others were students, hackers, even retired engineers who believed they were helping families get a fair shot in a world that was already tilting off its axis. They moved fast, trusted few, and never left a digital trail. At the same time, entire communities began to form outside the system. In places where governments turned a blind eye or simply lost control, enhanced people started building their own networks. Not to separate themselves, but to survive. They shared medical knowledge through encrypted forums. They pooled money to buy equipment. They trained each other in safe editing techniques, warning against risky shortcuts that had caused the Oslo health crisis. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and for the first time they weren't waiting for permission to care for their own. But the real fracture wasn't just between enhanced and unenhanced. It was between nations. Countries that had signed the global ban began to fall behind. Their best scientists left for places with looser rules. Their students couldn't compete in international contests where enhanced peers solved problems in minutes that took others hours. Their economies slowed as innovation moved elsewhere. One by one, even the strongest supporters of the ban started to waver. Then came the moment no one expected. A small country in Southeast Asia officially withdrew from the treaty. Not with a dramatic speech, but with a quiet policy update on a government website. From that day on, they would allow therapeutic and cognitive enhancements under national oversight. It was a polite way of saying, "We're done waiting." Other nations followed. Not all at once, but steadily, like dominoes tipping in slow motion. Some created innovation zones where enhancement was legal under strict guidelines. Others simply stopped enforcing the ban, turning a blind eye as long as things stayed peaceful. The United Nations Council issued statements of deep concern, but no one listened. Their power had been built on cooperation, and cooperation had vanished. Back on the ground, daily life grew more complicated. Schools struggled to teach classes where some students learned in hours what others needed weeks to grasp. Hospitals faced impossible choices. Treat an enhanced patient whose biology reacted differently to standard medicine, or risk making things worse. Employers didn't know whether to hire based on raw talent or worry about unfair advantages. Even friendships changed. People hesitated before sharing personal struggles, wondering if their friends' calm advice came from empathy or from an emotional regulation implant. Tension boiled over in unexpected ways. In one European city, a protest turned violent when a group of unenhanced workers accused a tech firm of only hiring mods. In another, a family was evicted from their apartment after neighbors claimed their child's late-night studying, aided by a focus-enhancing patch, was disrupting the natural order. Fear bred rumors, and rumors bred anger, and anger, as always, found the easiest targets. Yet amid the chaos, something else was growing, something quieter but far more powerful. Ordinary people, both enhanced and not, began talking to each other. Not through headlines or protests, but in kitchens, parks, and online forums where real names weren't used. But real feelings were shared. A teacher in Brazil confessed she felt useless next to her enhanced students, until one of them stayed after class to thank her for teaching them how to care, not just calculate. A factory worker in Poland admitted he resented enhanced colleagues, until he saw one break down in tears after losing a parent, proving that no implant could erase grief. These moments didn't make the news. They didn't change laws, but they changed hearts. Meanwhile, the woman from Geneva, now living in a quiet coastal town far from conference rooms and press cameras, watched it all unfold with a mix of sorrow and hope. She received messages daily, from worried parents, from confused teenagers, from doctors trying to do the right thing in a world with no clear rules. She never gave easy answers. Instead, she asked questions. What kind of world do you want to live in? Who gets to decide what human means? And most importantly, how do we keep our humanity no matter what tools we use? She knew the council's dream of turning back time was gone. But maybe, just maybe, something better could rise from the mess. Not a world where everyone was the same, but one where differences didn't mean division. Where technology served people, not the other way around. One evening, she walked along the shore, the wind tugging at her coat. A group of kids played nearby, laughing, shouting, chasing each other in the fading light. She couldn't tell who was enhanced and who wasn't, and for the first time in years she realized she didn't need to. They were just kids, full of energy, mistakes, dreams, and the messy, beautiful uncertainty of being alive. That night, she wrote a letter, not to the UN, not to any government, but to a loose network of scientists, teachers, doctors, and community leaders who'd reached out to her in secret. She didn't propose another ban. She didn't call for more control. Instead, she suggested something radical. Let's build something new together. Not from fear, but from care. She didn't know if anyone would listen. But as she hit send, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Not certainty, but possibility, because the world hadn't ended. It was just learning how to begin again. By 2045, the world hadn't split in two. It had woven itself into something new, messy, and strangely hopeful. The old United Nations Council still met in its grand hall in Geneva, but fewer people paid attention. Their resolutions gathered dust while real change happened elsewhere. In community labs, in classrooms, in quiet conversations between neighbors who once saw each other as threats. The dream of stopping human enhancement had died long ago. But from its ashes, something more honest was growing. It started not with a treaty, but with a handshake. In Reykjavik, a group of scientists, some enhanced, some not, invited doctors, teachers, ethicists, and even former critics to sit down together. No cameras, no speeches, just people tired of fear, ready to talk. They didn't argue about who was right. Instead, they asked, how do we live together now? What came out of those talks wasn't a ban or a free-for-all. It was a set of shared principles, simple, practical, and human-centered. They called it the Reykjavik Accords. No government forced it on anyone. It spread because people chose it. The rules were clear. Enhancements should be safe, reversible if possible, and never forced. Access should be fair, not just for the rich. And most importantly, no one should be treated as less human because of their biology. Clinics that once operated in shadows began registering with independent oversight groups, not to be controlled but to be trusted. They shared data openly, reported side effects without fear of punishment, and even helped develop low-cost versions of therapies so families in poorer regions could benefit too. One lab in Chile created a gene editing kit that cost less than a smartphone, designed specifically for rural clinics with limited power and internet. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Schools changed too. Instead of separating students, many began focusing on what everyone shared: curiosity, kindness, the need to belong. Teachers learned to spot when a student's struggle wasn't about intelligence, but about feeling left behind. Some schools even brought in empathy sessions where enhanced and unenhanced kids worked together on projects that needed both quick thinking and deep feeling, like designing a community garden or writing stories about their grandparents. The goal wasn't to erase differences, but to show that every kind of mind had value. And then came the real breakthrough: technology that helped people understand each other. Not by making everyone the same, but by bridging the gap. Simple neural tools, approved under the Accords, allowed people to temporarily experience how someone else saw the world. A baseline student could feel for a few minutes what it was like to hold a dozen ideas in their head at once. An enhanced adult could sense the quiet strength it took to solve a problem slowly, with patience and grit. These weren't mind-reading devices. They were more like emotional translators, and they did something no law ever could. They reminded people that behind every difference was a person, trying, failing, hoping, just like everyone else. The woman from Geneva didn't lead this movement. She didn't need to. She'd become more of a listener now, hosting small gatherings in her home where people from all walks of life could speak without titles or labels. Sometimes a teenager would show up, nervous, asking if it was okay to have been enhanced. Other times a parent would come, tears in their eyes, wondering if they'd made the right choice for their child. She never gave answers. She just made tea, sat quietly, and reminded them, "You're still you." That hasn't changed. Her niece was 12 now. She still loved drawing galaxies, but she'd also started coding simple apps that helped classmates with learning differences. She didn't know if she was enhanced or not. Her parents had never told her, and she'd stopped asking. To her, it didn't matter. What mattered was whether someone was kind, whether they tried, whether they showed up for others. And in her classroom, that was the real measure of a person. Back in the cities, life wasn't perfect. Old fears still flared up. Some communities remained wary, but the anger had lost its edge. People were too busy building to keep tearing down. New cooperatives sprang up. Farmers using drought-resistant crops developed by enhanced biologists. Artists collaborating across cognitive styles. Engineers designing tools that worked for all kinds of minds. Innovation wasn't just about being faster or smarter anymore. It was about being wiser, fairer, more connected. The old council watched all this from a distance, humbled. They hadn't been evil, just slow, cautious, trapped in a world that moved faster than their rules could follow. In time, even they began to adopt parts of the Reykjavik Accords not as law but as guidance. They stopped trying to control humanity and started trying to serve it. And humanity? It kept evolving, not just in labs but in kitchens, classrooms, and street corners. Not through grand declarations but through small acts of courage. A teacher staying late to help a struggling student, a neighbor sharing a homegrown remedy, a stranger offering a seat on a crowded bus. The truth was, no one had won. There was no final victory for enhancement or for tradition. Instead, people had learned to walk together, some with upgrades, some without, all carrying the same fragile, beautiful thing, the desire to belong, to matter, to leave the world a little better than they found it. One evening, as the sun set over the ocean near her home, the woman sat on her porch with a cup of tea. The wind carried the sound of children laughing down the street. Somewhere a guitar played, somewhere else a printer hummed, making parts for a new medical device. Life went on, not neatly, not perfectly, but fully. She smiled. The future hadn't been saved by a council, a law, or a miracle. It had been built one honest choice at a time by ordinary people who refused to let fear write the story. And that, she thought, was the most human thing of all.